Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Wednesday, the 26th of February. I'm Stephen Ridgway. Millions of WordPress websites are vulnerable due to a script injection vulnerability. Vulnerable to a vulnerability. You know what I'm trying to say here. There is a flaw in the essential add-ons for Eliminator plugin for WordPress. Believed to be on around 2 million WordPress sites globally. It allows for script injection, so potentially reasonably serious here. So CVE 2025-24752, a CVSS score of 7.1, which is high on one of the CVSS score scales. It is a cross-site scripting attack allowed by exploiting insufficient input sanitization for the plugin's password reset functionality. There is a write-up in the article that we will post. So the article I found this in was GB Hacker's article. We'll post a link to that on the briefing at the end, so you can have a look. There is a there's a decent write-up of the vulnerability and how the vulnerability works. Mitigations at the moment are to patch. So version 6.0.15 is the patched version to go to. The developers are WP developer. So have a look, make sure if you are using the essential add-ons for Eliminator plugin, very strong recommendation to apply patches. And as we said, we'll continue to remind people, yes, you can set components of your WordPress environment to auto update. In our experience, that isn't 100% reliable. It is always worth periodically going back in and checking that your WordPress theme and any plugins that you are using have actually updated and don't have any vulnerabilities sat there waiting to be exploited. And it's also worth using WordPress security tooling, such as we don't recommend any specific tool, but what we can say is that we've had good experiences with WordFence. So WordFence or something else similar to that is a good idea to run if you are using WordPress. There is a new backdoor for Linux that's been seen targeting, at the moment, mainly targeting North American governments and universities. It is dubbed Autocolor and has been seen in attacks at the end of last year, so November, December last year. It is a highly evasive piece of malware, which is particularly difficult to remove from infected systems, and consequently is liable to be, once it's got a toehold in your organization, is liable to be there delivering access to your adversaries for extended periods of time. The malware is, as I say, fairly well hidden. But once it's running, it provides a reverse shell. It can execute arbitrary commands, modify or create files to expand the infection. It can also act as a proxy for forwarding attacker traffic. And it can modify its own configurations, which is part of why it makes it difficult to detect. It can also intercept system calls. So there are hooks into the kernels. So it is quite a nasty piece of malware. Monitoring for changes to etc slash ld.preload is useful, and checking procnet TCP for output anomalies. And other than that, user-based threat detection solutions may be of help here. So it is something to watch out for. There is information in this article from Bleeping Computer which could be useful if you are looking to identify indicators of compromise. Although I think from reading the article, whilst it's not impossible to identify this particular piece of malware, you do need to have a little think about how you would go about doing this. The original discoverers, identifiers of this piece of malware were Palo Alto's Unit 42 researchers. And if they're saying it's highly evasive, let's be honest, we're not bigging up the competition, as it were, because they're not really. But Palo Alto's Unit 42, there's some pretty good research that's come out of there. So if they're saying it's difficult to deal with this, it will be difficult, but it won't be impossible. So have a read of the article. If you are concerned, if you're running a Linux environment and you're concerned about this stuff, it is worth being aware of this. It is worth keeping on top of it and looking to see whether further information unfolds. If I come across anything, I will let you know. And then finally from me, we talked about the changing shape of ransomware attacks over the last year or so. There is a good article from Info Security magazine that I came across this morning, which talks very much about that particular topic. Only a fifth of ransomware now is seen to be encrypting data. So whereas historically ransomware, the focus of ransomware was to encrypt and disrupt and then demand money for decryption and to restore service, I would say a reasonable proportion of organizations have caught up with that and have developed the abilities to restore critical business systems rapidly without having to decrypt the ransomware encrypted systems. That, coupled with a growing realization that once your system has been touched by malware, whether it's encrypted it or done something else to it, you can't have a lot of faith. In fact, you should really have no faith whatsoever in anything on that system remaining unadulterated. So the integrity of the system is, I think, it's beyond, there should be some doubts about its integrity through to, well, I think the assumption has got to be that the information, the data, whatever it may be on that system is now corrupted. Go back to something that you know is safe, which seriously undermines the business model of encrypting and demanding a ransom to decrypt. But what's become clear is that data exfiltration is the thing that organizations are worrying about most in this arena. So why bother writing complicated ransomware with encryption? You need to be managing keys and generally faffing about in order to undertake a traditional ransomware attack. If you're literally just installing a bit of software that exfiltrates data, your investment in that development and maintenance of that piece of software is much less. Your investment in managing your own infrastructure and your own processes as an attacker are less. You don't have to be able to tie specific keys to specific organizations and be able to demonstrate the ability to decrypt and blah, blah, blah. You just say, well, look, I've nicked your data. Here's a little sample of it. If you don't pay me, I'll release all this data. At the moment, that seems to be the approach which businesses, organizations, nation states, governments, anybody who's under attack, that's the bit that we haven't got a good solution for yet. I'm sure somebody will think up something that mitigates this risk. Just take a little while because it isn't obvious what to do. So focusing from an attacker's perspective, focusing on literally just grabbing the data and running makes the whole thing faster, easier, and more effective. The other side of this is that the amount of time between infection and what they're calling breakout time is somewhere between half an hour and an hour these days. So achieving lateral movement, as it were, across an organization is now, we're down to an hour or less in order to do that. That's concerning unless you've got systems which are able to pick up the traversal of malware in real time. There are things out there. There's some very good stuff. There are some good solutions, commercial solutions. There are also some good open source solutions that will help you to identify lateral movement as it's happening. Of course, it's easier to identify malware that's encrypting than malware which is simply exfiltrating. But there are plenty of things that you can do. So one of the things to think about with this, which I very strongly recommend, is that you stop your infrastructure team faffing about complaining around network monitoring and get some network monitoring in place. It's not hard. It just takes quite a lot of storage. If your network team is capable of designing a network, it's capable of designing a network which can then span or have tapped the traffic flowing through it. So understanding, being able to identify that data is being exfiltrated does require visibility of what's happening on the network. Also have a think about trying to identify this stuff from an endpoint protection perspective is more difficult because an endpoint is endlessly reading. Reading data from network shares, it's reading its local data, it's reading stuff. So that is harder but not impossible to identify things from. But a combination of host intrusion detection and network intrusion detection will give you the strongest possible chances, the best possible chances of identifying these attacks in real time. We still see that most, probably 80% plus of organizations are very reluctant to undertake any proper network monitoring at all. They might, if pushed, will concede that north-south traffic, so things entering from the outside of the organization into the organization, north-south traffic might be worth monitoring. East-west traffic is rarely monitored. It is a mistake. It is foolish. I am tired of seeing organizations that have been compromised that would have been, the compromise would have been contained if they'd have had some decent monitoring in place, but they haven't got decent monitoring in place. It is worth looking at that. It is worth being aware that you need to be able to identify things sort of in real time very quickly within your environment. And also think about network segmentation. If ransomware is propagating around your organization, be that a physical organization or a cloud-based organization, make sure that you are applying decent network segmentation and decent rules around limiting access. So only allow traffic that that is needed for business processes between different segments in your network, and do at the very minimum do things like ring fence your management and environment off from your production environments. So don't manage things through the network that you use for business processes. All that sort of really, really simple stuff that 25 years later, people are still going, oh, I've had this brilliant idea. Why don't we? Yeah, right. Well, yeah. Why didn't you? Okay. That is all from me for today. I hope you have a good Wednesday, and I'll speak to you all again tomorrow morning.